Before we get into the video, could everyone please subscribe to my Endless Diary Tales channel? Thank you so much. They say your wedding day is supposed to be the happiest day of your life. Mine was the day I died, figuratively of course. The real dying came later, after my blushing bride Andrea and my best friend Quinn finished carving up my life like a Thanksgiving turkey. Turns out I do can also mean, I do want to utterly destroy you and take everything you have. But the universe, in its infinite and frankly sarcastic wisdom, decided to give me a rewind. 1 year before the wedding, 1 year to the day I would say I do. Now I'm back, armed with the memories of my spectacular downfall and a burning desire for payback. This time, though, I'm not the naive groom walking down the aisle. I'm the architect of their ruin. The champagne tasted like ash in my mouth. It was the eve of my wedding, the culmination of a whirlwind romance, the beginning of my happily ever after. Or so I, Ryan Carter, ridiculously naive and hopelessly in love, believed I was. I was successful, at least by conventional standards, head of mergers and acquisitions at Carter Group, a company built by my father with a hefty salary, a penthouse apartment, and the respect, or perhaps it was just envy, of my peers. I was also, and this is where the universe clearly enjoys a good practical joke, kind-hearted, loyal, trusting, all qualities that in the cutthroat world of corporate finance were about as useful as a screen door on a submarine. And then there was Andrea. Andrea Lewis, my fiancée, beautiful, ambitious, with a smile that could launch 1,000 hostile takeovers. She was everything I thought I wanted. She was dazzling, and I, like a moth to a particularly well-lit bug zapper, was completely captivated. To Ryan and Andrea, Quinn Jackson, my best friend and business associate, toasted, raising his glass. May your life together be as profitable as our latest merger. The laughter that followed grated on my nerves. There was something off about Quinn. He always had been a little too smooth, a little too charming, a little too eager to please. But I dismissed my unease, chalking it up to jealousy, to my own insecurities. I caught a flicker of movement, a subtle exchange of glances between Andrea and Quinn, a shared smile that didn't quite reach their eyes, a familiarity that made my stomach churn. Don't be ridiculous, Ryan, I told myself. You're just stressed, pre-wedding jitters. It's nothing. It was everything. I excused myself, needing a moment of fresh air, a break from the suffocating atmosphere of forced celebration. I stepped out onto the balcony overlooking the city lights, and that's when I heard it. Their voices, Andrea and Quinn, whispering, laughing. Their words were muffled by the distance, but their tone was unmistakable. I crept closer, my heart pounding, my gut twisting with a dread I couldn't explain. Can't wait until this is over, Quinn. Andrea's voice laced with a disdain I'd never heard directed at me before. Married to that fool? It's almost unbearable. Patience, my love, Quinn replied, his voice smooth and reassuring. Just a little longer. I secured the Carter accounts once we've transferred the assets. Then Andrea asked, her voice eager, greedy. Quinn said, his voice dropping to a whisper. We'll be free to be together, free to enjoy the fruits of our labor. I stood there, frozen, my world collapsing around me. The conversation continued, revealing the full extent of their treachery. They'd been having an affair for months, maybe longer. They'd been manipulating me, draining my company, diverting investments, setting me up for a fall. They were going to ruin me, ruin my family, and they were enjoying it. I stumbled back, inside my mind reeling, my body numb. I looked at the crowd, at the smiling faces, at the oblivious joy of my guests, and I wanted to scream, to expose them, to shatter the illusion. But I couldn't, not yet. I needed proof, I needed a plan, I needed to survive. The confrontation, when it came, was anticlimactic. I confronted them, of course, in my penthouse after the party. I laid out the evidence I'd managed to gather in the short, frantic hours since my horrifying discovery. Printed emails, bank statements, the damning recording of their conversation. Andrea, I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of anger and disbelief. What is this? What have you done? She didn't deny it, not at first. She just stared at me, her eyes wide, her face pale. Quinn, however, tried to bluff his way out of it. This is ridiculous, Ryan, he said, his voice smooth but laced with a tremor of nervousness. You're misunderstanding. This is treason, Quinn, I said, my voice cold and hard. This is betrayal. You're both traitors. Then Andrea found her voice, and her performance was Oscar-worthy. Ryan, darling, she said, her voice trembling, tears welling up in her eyes. It's not what it looks like. Quinn, he forced me. He threatened me. He said he'd hurt you. Hurt your family if I didn't. It was a lie, of course, a blatant, desperate lie. But it was a lie delivered with such conviction, such skill, that for a moment I almost believed her. Almost. You're lying, Andrea, I said, my voice flat. You're lying, and you know it. She collapsed, sobbing, clinging to my legs, begging for forgiveness. Quinn, seeing his opportunity, tried to play the hero. Get away from her, Ryan, he shouted, stepping forward, his fists clenched. Can't you see she's distraught? You're upsetting her. It was all a show. A carefully orchestrated performance designed to manipulate me, to control me, to save their skins. But it didn't work, not this time. I pushed Andrea away, my disgust overwhelming any lingering affection I might have felt. Get out, I said, my voice low and dangerous. Get out of my apartment, get out of my life, and take your lover with you. They left, defeated, disgraced, their plans in ruins. But their departure didn't bring me any relief, any satisfaction. It just emptied me. The fallout was swift and brutal. The news of Andrea's betrayal, of Quinn's treachery, of the financial ruin they'd orchestrated spread like wildfire. My company, my family. Our company collapsed. Our assets were seized, our reputation destroyed, our future obliterated. My father, a proud, honorable man, was broken by the scandal. He couldn't handle the shame, the loss, the betrayal. He suffered a heart attack brought on by stress and despair. He died a few weeks later. His last words were a whispered curse against the woman who had destroyed his family. My friends, my colleagues, the people I trusted abandoned me. They distanced themselves, afraid of being tainted by the scandal, by the failure. I reached out to one of my closest friends, a man I'd considered a brother, seeking support, seeking understanding. Ryan, he said, his voice awkward, his eyes avoiding mine. I can't be seen with you. It's bad for business. You understand, right? I understood perfectly. Loyalty in this world was a commodity, and I was bankrupt. I was alone, utterly and completely alone, stripped of everything, my life in ruins, my heart broken. And then the end. It's hazy even now. I remember walking aimlessly through the city streets, lost in my grief, my despair, my rage. I remember a bottle of whiskey, I think a lot of whiskey, and then nothing. Some say it was an accident, a stumble, a fall, a tragic misstep. Others whisper of suicide, of a man driven to despair by the sheer weight of his misfortune. I don't remember. I don't know. All I know is that I died alone, broken and utterly defeated, a victim of my own naivety, of my own trust, of my own foolish belief in the goodness of others. But as the darkness closed in, as my life ebbed away, I made a vow, a desperate, furious, impossible vow. If I ever get another chance, I swore to whatever gods might be listening, I will make them pay, every single one of them. And then nothing until, of course, the something, the rebirth, the second chance, the game reset and reloaded. This time I wasn't playing by their rules. This time I was playing to win and to destroy. The world snapped back into focus with a disorienting rush of color and sound. I was lying in my bed, in my room, in the house I'd grown up in, but everything felt wrong and smaller, younger. I sat up, my head pounding, my body feeling alien. I looked at my hands, at my arms, at my reflection in the ridiculously ornate mirror across the room. It was me, but not me. It was a younger version of myself, a year younger to be precise. The lines of stress and cynicism were gone, replaced by a youthful smoothness, a naive optimism that made me want to punch something. The memories flooded in, a tidal wave of pain, betrayal, and regret. My disastrous marriage to Andrea, Quinn's treachery, my family's ruin, my death. It all came rushing back, vivid and agonizing. A stark reminder of everything I'd lost. I was back 1 year before the wedding, 1 year before my life imploded. It was insane, impossible, a cosmic joke of the cruelest kind. This time I muttered, my voice hoarse, my reflection staring back at me with newfound determination. I will not be a pawn. I will be the one controlling the board. Was a vow a promise to myself? A declaration of war against fate itself? I had a year to change everything. The first few days were a blur of careful calculations and strategic maneuvering. I had to play the part to maintain the facade of the loving fiancé while secretly dismantling the trap that had been so carefully laid for me. And that meant distancing myself from Andrea. It was harder than I expected. The memories of my past life, of the love I'd felt for her, or rather, for the illusion of her, were still there, a phantom limb that ached with a phantom pain. But I couldn't afford to be sentimental. I couldn't afford to be weak. I had to be ruthless, cold, calculating. I became distant, aloof. I avoided her calls, cut short our conversations, and generally treated her with a polite indifference that bordered on disdain. "Ryan, darling," she said one evening as we were supposed to be having dinner at her parents' house, "you seem preoccupied. Is everything all right?" Her voice was laced with a carefully cultivated concern, her eyes wide and innocent. It was a performance, of course, a performance she perfected over years of manipulation. "I'm fine, Andrea," I replied, my voice flat. "Just busy with work." She scoffed, a hint of her true nature slipping through. "You never used to care about work. You used to care about me." "Things change, Andrea," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "People change." She studied me for a moment, her eyes narrowed, sensing the shift in our dynamic. She didn't like it. She was used to being in control, to pulling my strings, to having me wrapped around her little finger. She tried her usual tactics. She pouted, she flirted, she even cried, but it was no use. I was immune to her charm, inoculated by the bitter knowledge of her betrayal. "What's wrong with you, Ryan?" she demanded, her voice rising in frustration. "Why are you acting like this? Don't you love me anymore?" "Love," I repeated, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "Love is a word you use, Andrea, not a feeling you experience." Her face paled. She knew on some level that I was seeing through her, that the game was changing. While I played the part of the distant fiancé, I was also secretly working to secure my family's future. I started by discreetly moving assets. I transferred funds to offshore accounts, invested in secure long-term ventures, and generally made sure that my family's wealth was protected from Andrea and Quinn's future machinations. It was a delicate dance, a balancing act between maintaining the illusion of normalcy and preparing for the coming storm. I couldn't arouse suspicion. I couldn't alert my enemies to my plans. I used my knowledge of future market trends to make small but strategic investments. I focused on companies that I knew would experience significant growth, on technologies that would revolutionize the world. I remembered vividly the rise of a particular social media platform, a company that had started small, but had quickly become a global phenomenon. I invested heavily, buying up shares at a ridiculously low price. Knowing that they would soon be worth a fortune, I did the same with a renewable energy company. It was like having a cheat code for the stock market, and I, the reborn reluctant tycoon, was using it to my full advantage. I also started researching Quinn Jackson. I needed to understand his weaknesses, his vulnerabilities, his connections. I knew from my past life that he was a fraud, a con man, a parasite, but I needed proof, evidence that I could use to destroy him. I hired a private investigator, a discreet, reliable individual whom I'd vetted carefully. I gave him specific instructions, targets, and a generous budget. I wanted to know everything about him. I told the investigator his finances, his associates, his secrets. Leave no stone unturned. The game, as always, was about information, and I, armed with the knowledge of the future and a burning desire for revenge, was determined to gather as much information as possible to build my arsenal, to prepare my defenses, to strike when the time was right. The clock was ticking, the wedding day approaching, but I, Ryan Carter, was no longer a pawn. I was the player, and I was about to change the rules of the game. The Lewis family. Yes, the social climbing, status-obsessed, money-grubbing in-laws from hell. They were, in a word, ghastly. Mr. Lewis, a portly, balding man with a perpetually anxious expression, saw me as a walking, talking bank account, a means to elevate his family's standing in society. He was a master of the backhanded compliment, the veiled insult disguised as fatherly advice. "You're a lucky man, Ryan," he'd say, clapping me on the shoulder with a force that almost knocked me off my feet. "Marrying into a family like ours, we have connections, influence. You'll go far with Andrea by your side and with your hand in my pocket," I thought bitterly. Mrs. Lewis was even worse, a woman of sharp angles and sharper words. She was obsessed with appearances, with social status, with squeezing every last drop of advantage out of her daughter's marriage. "You need to be more assertive, Ryan," she'd say, her voice laced with disapproval. "You need to show Andrea who's in charge." You need to make a name for yourself. I'm quite content with my name, Mrs. Lewis, I'd reply, my voice carefully neutral. But you could be so much more, Ryan, she'd insist. With Andrea by your side, you could be unstoppable. You could be like the Reeds. The Reeds, always the bloody Reeds. They were the gold standard, the unattainable ideal, the family they desperately wanted to emulate. And I, the supposedly clueless fiancé, was their ticket to that exclusive club. Their shallowness was breathtaking. Their greed was almost admirable in a twisted sort of way. They were caricatures, villains in a poorly written melodrama, and I, unfortunately, was cast as the hapless victim. But not this time. The day of the original wedding arrived, a day that in my past life had marked the beginning of my end. This time, however, it would be a day of reckoning. Andrea predictably was a vision of bridal perfection. She wore a designer gown, a ridiculously expensive creation that probably cost more than my first car. She radiated confidence, smugness, and a barely concealed triumph. She thought she had me, she thought she'd won. She was wrong. I'd spent the past few months meticulously gathering evidence, building my case, preparing for this moment. I had proof of her affair with Quinn, their financial manipulations, their plan to ruin me. I'd chosen my stage carefully. The pre-wedding celebration, a lavish affair held at my family's estate, attended by all the right people, the very people Andrea craved to impress. I waited patiently, letting the charade play out. I endured the toasts, the congratulations, the pitying glances from those who knew or suspected the truth. Then, as Andrea was giving a particularly saccharine speech about our undying love and our bright future, I made my move. I stood up, my chair scraping against the polished floor, silencing the room. I have an announcement to make, I said, my voice clear and steady, cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. Andrea looked at me, her smile faltering, a flicker of unease in her eyes. I'm afraid, I continued, my gaze sweeping over the assembled guests, that there will be no wedding today or ever. The silence that followed was deafening. Then the whispers erupted, a chorus of shocked gasps and incredulous murmurs. What? What are you saying, Ryan? Andrea stammered, her face paling. I'm saying, I said, my voice hardening, that I know about you, about Quinn, about everything. I then proceeded to lay out the truth in all its ugly detail. I revealed their affair, their financial schemes, their plan to destroy me. I presented the evidence. Printed emails, bank statements, even a recorded conversation between Andrea and Quinn outlining their treachery. The effect was devastating, and Andrea's facade crumbled. She tried to deny it, to bluster, to lie her way out of it, but it was no use. The evidence was overwhelming. Quinn, who had been standing nearby, his face a mask of smug confidence, turned pale. He tried to intervene to defend Andrea, but I cut him off. And you, Quinn, I said, my voice laced with contempt, you're nothing but a parasite, a con man, a thief. You used my friendship, my trust, to line your own pockets. You're finished, both of you. The guests, initially stunned, began to react. Some were horrified. Others were gleeful. The sharks, as always, were circling, sensing blood in the water. Mr. Lewis, Andrea's father, a man who had always treated me with thinly veiled disdain, exploded. He lunged at Quinn, his face contorted with rage, shouting accusations, threats, and a string of surprisingly creative insults. Mrs. Lewis, ever the social climber, fainted dramatically. Of course, it was chaos, a beautiful, glorious, utterly satisfying chaos. I watched it all unfold, a detached observer in the eye of the storm. I'd done it. I'd exposed them, ruined them, destroyed their carefully constructed facade. The victory felt hollow. It didn't bring back my past life. It didn't erase the pain, the betrayal, the loss. It was just revenge, cold, hard, and ultimately unsatisfying. But it was necessary. As the chaos died down, a familiar face came up to me. It was Yana Lee. In my past life, she had confessed to me. I had been too blind, caught up in my own drama to see her. She'd been hurt, and I regretted not seeing it. Ryan, she began. You okay? I met her eyes, but she looked away. I'm sorry, Yana, for everything, I said. She was silent for a moment, then looked up at me with a sad smile on her face. It's all right, Ryan, she said. It wasn't meant to be, not that way. I was a fool, I said, my voice filled with regret. You were. she agreed, a hint of her old spark returning. But you're not anymore, are you? I shook my head. No, I said. I'm not. She smiled, a genuine warm smile that reached her eyes. Good, she said. Because the world needs fewer fools and more men like you. It was a start, a new beginning, a chance to build a different future. A future free from the shadows of my past. The game, as always, was about moving forward, and I, Ryan Carter, the reborn reluctant tycoon, was finally ready to play on my own terms. This time I intended to win, not just for myself but for a future I could finally believe in. The fallout from the non-wedding was predictably a nuclear explosion of social awkwardness and financial repercussions. I, Ryan Carter, was now the pariah, the black sheep, the man who had dared to expose the beloved Andrea Lewis and the oh-so-charming Quinn Jackson. The phone calls were the worst, ranging from my grandfather's furious inquiries. Thankfully, he wasn't entirely in the dark about my suspicions, thanks to a few strategically placed concerns I'd voiced in the past few months, to the outraged shrieks of society matrons who'd lost a prime piece of gossip fodder. How could you, Ryan? One particularly shrill voice demanded. Andrea was such a lovely girl, and Quinn such a promising young man. He was also embezzling from my company and sleeping with my fiancée, I replied, my voice dangerously calm. But you know the details. I hung up, feeling a flicker of satisfaction. I was burning bridges, yes, but they were bridges I didn't need, bridges built on lies and deception. The Lewis family, predictably, was apoplectic. Mr. Lewis, fueled by cheap whiskey and wounded pride, threatened lawsuits, public denunciations, and pretty much anything he could think of to salvage his family's shattered reputation. You'll pay for this, Carter, he roared during a particularly unpleasant phone call. You'll regret this. You've ruined my daughter. You've ruined us. Your daughter ruined herself, Mr. Lewis, I replied, my voice cold and devoid of emotion. And as for you, well, I suggest you focus on damage control because the truth, as they say, has a way of coming out. I severed all ties with them swiftly and decisively. Contracts were canceled, investments were withdrawn, and social invitations were rescinded. Ions were politely declined. I was building a wall around myself, around my family, protecting us from the toxic fallout of their actions. There were whispers, of course, rumors, speculations, accusations. Some people believed me, saw the truth in my actions. Others, blinded by social pressure or their own self-interest, sided with the Lewises, painting me as the villain, the jilted lover seeking revenge. But I didn't care. I had a plan, a long-term strategy, and I wouldn't let anything or anyone distract me from it. The Blue Ocean Plan. It was a deal, a project, a golden goose that I'd foolishly let slip through my fingers in my past life. It involved a revolutionary new technology, a breakthrough in renewable energy that had the potential to transform the industry. In my previous life, Quinn had stolen the deal using my research, my connections, my trust to secure it for himself. This time it would be different. I started laying the groundwork discreetly, meticulously. I researched the company Solaris Innovations, the key players, the obstacles. I knew from my past life that Solaris was struggling to secure funding, that they were on the verge of collapse, and that's where Larry Baker came in. Larry was my father's best friend, a man who made his fortune in real estate and had a reputation for being a shrewd, ruthless, but ultimately fair businessman. He was also, I knew, a man who valued loyalty, who respected honesty, and who didn't suffer fools gladly. I arranged a meeting, a casual lunch at his ridiculously extravagant country club. Ryan, my boy, he boomed, greeting me with a hearty handshake. Good to see you. Heard about the unfortunate business with the Lewis girl. Nasty stuff, but chin up, eh? Plenty of fish in the sea. Thanks, Larry, I said, forcing a smile. Actually, I wanted to talk to you about business. He raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Business? You, Ryan? I thought you were more interested in wine, women, and song. I'm turning over a new leaf, Larry, I said, my voice serious. And I have a proposition for you, something big. I laid out the Blue Ocean Plan, explaining the technology, the potential, the risks. I told him about Solaris Innovations, about their struggles, about their imminent breakthrough. He listened, his eyes narrowed, his expression thoughtful. He asked pointed questions, challenged my assumptions, tested my knowledge. This is a gamble, Ryan, he said finally. A big one. Why should I trust you? Because I know it will work, Larry, I replied, meeting his gaze directly. I have, information. Let's just say I have a very good source. He studied me for a long moment, then a slow smile spread across his face. You've got guts, kid, he said. I'll give you that. All right, Ryan, I'm in, but I'm watching you closely. With Larry's backing, securing the Blue Ocean plan was surprisingly easy. We swooped in, offered Solaris a lifeline, and secured exclusive rights to their technology. It was a coup, a masterstroke that would, in a few short years, transform the energy industry and make us both incredibly wealthy. And then she walked back into my life.
Yana Lee.
We'd been friends of a sort in my past life, childhood friends actually. We drifted apart as we got older, our paths diverging, our lives taking different directions. She'd confessed her feelings for me once a long time ago, but I, blinded by my infatuation with Andrea, had rejected her gently, I'd hoped, but still a rejection. I hadn't seen her in years. She'd been abroad, building her own career, making her own way in the world, and now she was back. She was even more beautiful than I remembered. Confident, successful, with an air of quiet authority that commanded respect. She was a businesswoman, a force to be reckoned with, and she was intrigued by my sudden transformation. Ryan, she said, her voice a mixture of surprise and something else as she approached me at a business conference. Is that really you? You look different. I am different, Jana, I replied, smiling. Older, wiser, and definitely less foolish. She laughed, a warm, genuine sound that sent a surprising jolt of something through me. I heard about the wedding, she said, her expression softening. I'm sorry, Ryan. You deserve better. I know that now, I said, my voice low. We talked for hours, catching up, sharing our stories, our experiences. She told me about her successes, her challenges, her ambitions. I, in turn, told her part of the truth, enough to explain my change in behavior, my newfound focus, my determination to succeed. You've surprised me, Ryan, she said finally, her eyes searching mine. I always knew you had potential, but I never thought you'd, become a ruthless, cold-hearted businessman. I finished for her, a sly smile playing on my lips. Something like that, she admitted. I'm still figuring things out, Jana, I said, my voice serious. But I know this. I won't make the same mistakes again. I won't let myself be used. I won't let my family be destroyed. She nodded, her expression thoughtful. I believe you, Ryan, she said. And I'm here if you need anything at all. There was a spark, an undeniable attraction, a connection that had been simmering beneath the surface for years. But I hesitated. I was still raw, still wounded, still unsure of myself. But I also knew that Yana Lee was someone special, someone I could trust, someone who might just be the key to my future happiness. The game, as always, was about making the right choices, and this time I was determined to choose wisely. Not with my ambition, not with my ego, but with my heart. A heart that, surprisingly, was starting to beat again. The Blue Ocean plan was more than just a business deal. It was a symbol of my past failure, of Quinn's treachery, of everything I'd lost. And now it was my chance for redemption, my chance for revenge. I knew from my past life that Quinn was obsessed with securing the Blue Ocean contract. He saw it as his ticket to the big leagues, his opportunity to finally step out of my shadow, or rather the shadow of the man he thought I was. He made himself a worthy player in the corporate world. He was predictably using his usual tactics: charm, flattery, and a healthy dose of backroom dealing. He was courting the executives at Solaris Innovations, wining and dining them, promising them the moon and the stars. But I had an advantage. I knew the future. I knew that Solaris was on the verge of a breakthrough, that their technology was revolutionary, and that their stock price was about to explode. I also knew Quinn's weaknesses: his arrogance, his greed, and his utter lack of originality. I started by subtly undermining his efforts. I used my growing network of contacts, my secret financial resources, and my uncanny intuition to plant seeds of doubt, to raise concerns, to make Solaris executives question Quinn's offer. Heard Quinn Jackson is having some financial difficulties, I whispered to a key investor during a chance encounter at a business lunch. Might want to double-check his numbers. Rumor has it. I confided in a prominent journalist over a carefully orchestrated off-the-record drink that Quinn's proposal was overly optimistic based on inflated projections. The whispers spread, the doubts grew, and Quinn's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. Then I made my move. I offered Solaris a deal they couldn't refuse, a deal that was not only financially superior to Quinn's but also offered them something far more valuable. A long-term partnership, a commitment to innovation, a vision for the future. "I'm not just interested in acquiring your technology, Mr. Thorne," I said during my presentation to the Solaris board. "I'm interested in investing in your vision, in helping you change the world." It was a calculated gamble, a bold move that could have backfired spectacularly, but I knew with the absolute certainty of my past life knowledge that it would work. And it did. Solaris Innovations signed with me, with Carter Financial rejecting Quinn's offer and shattering his dreams of corporate glory. The victory was sweet, but it was just the beginning. I needed to make an example of Quinn, to show him and the world that I was not to be trifled with. "You took everything from me, Quinn," I said, confronting him in his now significantly less impressive office. "My company, my reputation, my future. Now I'm going to return the favor." He stared at me, his face a mask of fury and disbelief. "You cheated, Carter," he spat. "You used your connections, your family name to steal this deal from me." "I used my brain, Quinn," I corrected him, my voice cold and hard. "Something you clearly lack. You relied on charm and deception. I relied on strategy and foresight." "You'll pay for this, Carter," he threatened, his voice trembling with rage. "You'll regret this." "I doubt it," I replied, smiling. "In fact, I'm fairly certain that you're the one who's going to be doing the regretting." And then the villa. Quinn, desperate to maintain his image, to impress potential investors, to salvage his crumbling reputation, threw a lavish party at a luxurious. The villa overlooking the ocean was claimed to be his, of course, a symbol of his success, his wealth, his impeccable taste. It was a lie. The villa, as I well knew, belonged to an old acquaintance, a retired actress who was currently out of the country. Quinn had simply borrowed it without her knowledge or consent. It was a perfect opportunity, a chance to expose him, to humiliate him, to shatter his carefully constructed facade of success. I arrived at the party, uninvited of course, with a guest of my own, a woman I'd met at a previous event who was fast becoming an ally, Cynthia Reynolds. Cynthia Reynolds was a force of nature, a powerful, influential businesswoman with a reputation for being ruthless, intelligent, and utterly unforgiving. She was also, I suspected, someone who appreciated a good show. "Quite a party, Mr. Jackson," I said, approaching Quinn with a polite smile. He was holding court, surrounded by a group of investors, boasting about his non-existent successes. "Carter," he said, his voice tight with barely concealed anger. "What are you doing here?" "Just admiring the view," I replied, my gaze sweeping over the opulent surroundings. "And congratulating you on your new home, or is it?" His face paled. He knew instantly that I was on to him. I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered. "Oh, I think you do, Quinn," I said, my voice rising slightly, drawing the attention of the surrounding guests. "I think you know exactly what I'm talking about. This villa, it's not yours, is it? You're squatting like the parasite you are." The whispers started, the murmurs of doubt, the dawning realization that they'd been had. Cynthia Reynolds stepped forward, her expression one of authority. "Mr. Jackson," she said, her voice ringing with authority, "I believe you owe us an explanation unless, of course, you'd prefer I call the authorities." Quinn's facade crumbled. He tried to deny it, to bluster, to lie his way out of it, but it was no use. The truth was out. The party, once a celebration of Quinn's imagined success, became a scene of chaos and humiliation. The investors, realizing they'd been duped, turned on him, their anger fueled by champagne and a healthy dose of schadenfreude. And I, Ryan Carter, the reborn reluctant tycoon, watched it all unfold with quiet satisfaction. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice, about setting the record straight, about reclaiming my life. Cynthia Reynolds, impressed by my performance, offered me a subtle nod of respect. "You're a dangerous man, Mr. Carter," she said, a hint of admiration in her voice. "Only to my enemies, Miss Reynolds," I replied, smiling. "Perhaps," she said, her eyes twinkling, "we could be allies." It was the beginning of a beautiful and mutually beneficial partnership. But even as I savored this victory, as I reveled in Quinn's downfall, I knew that the game was far from over. He was desperate, cornered, and that made him unpredictable. And as I would soon discover, he wasn't alone. He had partnered with the Sterling Group, a company with a reputation for bending the rules. They were launching a new investment scheme, a revolutionary project that promised enormous returns. It was, of course, a scam, a carefully constructed pyramid scheme designed to enrich Quinn and his cronies at the expense of everyone else. I knew from my past life that the Sterling Group was a house of cards destined to collapse, and I intended to help it along. I started gathering evidence using my connections, my resources, and my growing network of informants. I uncovered their fraudulent activities, their illegal dealings, their utter disregard for the law, and then I leaked it to the press, to the authorities, to anyone who would listen. The scandal erupted, a firestorm of accusations, investigations, and public outrage. The Sterling Group's stock price plummeted, their investors panicked, and their carefully constructed empire crumbled. Quinn was once again ruined, his reputation shattered, his fortune gone, his future bleak. But this time it was different. This time he was truly alone. His allies had abandoned him, his friends had deserted him, and his dreams had turned to ashes. I had won again, but the victory, as always, was bittersweet. I destroyed my enemies, yes, but I'd also become them. I'd used their tactics, their methods, their ruthlessness to achieve my goals. I was walking a dangerous path, a path that could easily lead to my own destruction. The game, as always, was about balance, and I, Ryan Carter, the reborn tycoon, was still trying to find that balance between justice and vengeance, between power and morality. The future was uncertain, yes, but one thing was clear. I would not be a victim. I would not be a pawn. I would be the master of my own destiny, or at least I'd die trying. Again, the Sterling Group's revolutionary investment scheme was, in reality, a house of cards built on lies, deceit, and outright fraud. I knew this, of course, because I'd seen it all before. I'd lived through the collapse, the investigations, the consequences. This time, however, I wouldn't be a victim. I would be the architect of their downfall. I started by gathering evidence, financial records, internal memos, whistleblower testimonies. Anything I could get my hands on that would expose the truth. I used my connections, my resources, and a healthy dose of persuasion to acquire the necessary information. I had a small army working. Then I leaked it. Not all at once, of course. That would have been too obvious, too predictable. I did it strategically, anonymously releasing small pieces of information to the press, to the authorities, to the right people. I started with a few carefully chosen whispers, planting seeds of doubt in the minds of investors, triggering a wave of unease. Have you seen the latest reports on the Sterling Group's new project? I'd say casually to a prominent financial analyst during a chance encounter at a business luncheon. Seems a bit too good to be true, doesn't it? I've heard some rumors. I'd confide in a well-connected journalist over a carefully orchestrated off-the-record drink, rumors of irregularities, inflated projections, and outright fraud. The whispers grew louder, the doubts more persistent, the unease palpable. Then I released the first concrete evidence. A leaked internal memo detailing the fraudulent accounting practices, the inflated valuations, the sheer scale of the deception. The reaction was swift. The press, always hungry for a scandal, pounced on the story. The headlines screamed, the accusations flew, and the Sterling Group stock price began to plummet. Sterling Group under investigation for fraud, blared one headline. Investors panic as stock price plummets. CEO Quinn Jackson denies allegations, calls it a witch hunt, read another. But it was too late, the damage was done. Investors, fearing a complete collapse, started to pull out. Banks called in their loans. Regulators launched investigations, and Quinn Jackson, the arrogant, entitled, utterly incompetent businessman, found himself in the center of a firestorm. He was kicked out, ousted, stripped of his position, his authority, his power. The company he'd so desperately craved to control, the company he had used and abused, had turned on him. His reputation was ruined, his assets frozen, his future bleak. It was a victory, yes, a satisfying, long-awaited victory, but it was also, I knew, just the beginning. Andrea predictably didn't fare much better. Abandoned by Quinn, stripped of her wealth and status, she found herself adrift. She had hitched her wagon to a falling star, and now she was paying the price. She tried, of course, to salvage the situation. She attempted to cling to the remnants of her former life, to maintain the facade of wealth and privilege, but it was no use. The truth was out, and the truth, as always, was ugly. She was forced to sell her apartment, her designer clothes, her jewels. She was ostracized by her former friends, ridiculed by her enemies, and pitted by those who had once envied her. And then she made a mistake. A desperate, foolish mistake. She turned to Rock. Rock was a character, a dangerous and scrupulous businessman with a reputation for getting things done. He operated in the shadows, dealing in favors, influence, and things that were best left unsaid. He'd always been on the periphery of my radar, a potential threat, a wild card, but I'd never directly interacted with him until now. Andrea, desperate for money, for protection, for a way out, offered herself to him. Not as a lover, not as a partner, but as a pawn, a tool to be used, abused, and ultimately discarded. "I can help you, Andrea," he said, his voice a low, oily purr as he met with her in a seedy back alley bar. "I can get you back on your feet, but it will cost you." "Anything," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'll do anything." And that's when I should have stepped away, let her suffer, should have let her face her consequences. But I didn't. I couldn't. Despite everything, despite the betrayal, the pain, the sheer, unadulterated hatred I felt for her. I couldn't just abandon her, not to him, not to that. But any intervention on my part would be seen as weakness, as a lingering attachment, as a vulnerability. So I remained indifferent. Publicly, I let the rumors swirl, the whispers grow. The inevitable downfall of Andrea Lewis play out. But secretly I was watching, waiting, planning. Because I knew Rockwell's true intentions. He wasn't just interested in Andrea. He was interested in me. He saw me as a rival, a threat, a target, and he was using Andrea as bait, as a way to lure me into a trap. I learned through my network of informants that Rockwell was planning to use Andrea to discredit me, to frame me for a crime, to ruin my reputation, to destroy everything I'd built. It was a dangerous game, a high-stakes gamble, but I was ready. I'd anticipated this move, prepared for it, and I had a plan. I exposed the scam, not directly, not yet, but subtly, strategically, using my connections, my influence, my growing power. I leaked information to the authorities, to the press, to the right people. I planted evidence, I manipulated events, I turned the tables on Rockwell, exposing his own criminal activities, his own twisted game. He was arrested, his empire crumbling, his reputation in tatters. And Andrea was left once again alone, abandoned, ruined. But this time there was no one to blame but herself. She'd made her choices, she'd played her hand, and she'd lost the game. As always, it was about consequences, and I, Ryan Carter, the reborn tycoon, was simply ensuring that those consequences were delivered fairly, or at least as fairly as possible in a world as unfair as this one. The wedding was everything the first one should have been. It wasn't a lavish, ostentatious display of wealth, but a celebration of love, of genuine connection, of a future we were building together. Jana and I chose a small, intimate ceremony held in the gardens of the Carter estate, surrounded by our closest friends and family. The air was filled with the scent of flowers, the sound of laughter, and the palpable feeling of happiness. Jana was radiant. She wore a simple, elegant gown, her hair adorned with flowers, her eyes shining with a love that made my heart ache with a joy I'd never thought I'd experience again. I, Ryan Carter, the reborn tycoon, the man who had once been so consumed by revenge and ambition, felt peaceful, serene as I watched Jana walk towards me, her hand in her father's. I knew that I had made the right choices. I had overcome the past, defeated my enemies, and found my true love. The vows we exchanged were not just words. They were promises. Promises of loyalty, of support, of unwavering love. I, Ryan Carter, I said, my voice firm and clear, my gaze locked on Jana's. I take you, Jana Lee, to be my wife, my partner, my love for all the days of my life. I promise to cherish you, to protect you, to build a future with you. A future based on trust, on respect, and on a love that will endure all things. I, Jana Lee, replied, her voice trembling slightly, her eyes shining with tears of joy. I take you, Ryan Carter, to be my husband, my partner, my love for all the days of my life. I promise to support you, to challenge you, to stand by your side no matter what the future may hold. The kiss that sealed our vows was electric, a spark of pure joy, of shared hope, of a love that had defied the odds, that had overcome betrayal, that had healed my broken heart. The reception was a celebration not of wealth or status, but of connection, of friendship, of family. We danced, we laughed, we lived. And then she appeared, Andrea. She crashed the wedding. Of course, it was a scene straight out of a bad movie. A desperate, pathetic attempt to reclaim what she'd lost. She was a wreck. Her clothes were disheveled, her hair was a mess, her eyes were wild and filled with a desperate, almost manic energy. "Ryan!" she cried, her voice shrill and echoing through the suddenly silent reception hall. "Ryan, you have to listen to me. I made a mistake. I was wrong. I still love you." The guests gasped, murmured, stared. Jana, bless her heart, simply tightened her grip on my hand, her expression calm and unwavering. I looked at Andrea, at the woman who had once been my fiancée, the woman who had betrayed me, the woman who had helped destroy my life, and I felt nothing. No anger, no pity, no lingering affection, just emptiness. "Andrea," I said, my voice cold and devoid of emotion, "you need to leave. You're not welcome here." But Ryan," she pleaded, her voice cracking, tears streaming down her face. "I was wrong. I was foolish. I let Quinn manipulate me. I let my ambition blind me. Please, Ryan, give me another chance. We can go back to the way things were." "There is no going back, Andrea," I said, my voice firm. "The past is the past, and you are a part of that past. A part one have no desire to revisit." "But I love you, Ryan," she insisted, her voice rising in desperation. "I've always loved you." It was a lie, of course, a pathetic, desperate lie, and everyone in the room knew it. Jana stepped forward, her expression calm but her eyes blazing with quiet fury. "He's my husband now, Andrea," she said, her voice ringing with authority. "And I suggest you leave before I have you removed." Andrea stared at her, at Jana, at the woman who had, in her mind, stolen her future, her prize. And then she looked at me, her eyes filled with a desperate, pleading look. "Ryan, please," she begged. "Don't do this. Don't throw me away. I need you." I looked at her, at the broken, desperate woman before me, and I felt nothing. No pity, no anger, just a profound sense of closure. "Goodbye, Andrea," I said, my voice flat. "I wish you well." And with that, I turned away, taking Jana's hand and walking back into the celebration, leaving Andrea standing there alone, defeated and utterly ruined. Security escorted her out, her sobs echoing through the hall. It was a harsh ending, yes, but a necessary one. He was a ghost, a specter haunting the edges of my new life. He was ruined utterly and completely. His business ventures had collapsed, his reputation was shattered, and his so-called friends had deserted him. He was alone, penniless, and powerless. I had orchestrated his downfall meticulously, ensuring every avenue of escape was closed, every potential ally turned against him. He was a cautionary tale, a reminder of the price of treachery. I saw him once from a distance. He was begging on the streets, a shadow of his former self. His eyes filled with a despair that mirrored my own from a lifetime ago. I felt a flicker of something, pity, regret? I wasn't sure, but it was fleeting. He'd made his choices, and he was living with the consequences. The epilogue takes place several years later. Ryan and Jana Carter, the names were synonymous with success, with innovation, with a new kind of power. A power built not on exploitation and deceit, but on integrity, on vision, on love. We had built a life together, a family. Our children, bright and curious, played in the gardens of our home, their laughter echoing through the air, a testament to the future we were building. Carter Enterprises, I'd renamed it, of course, shedding the tainted legacy of the past, was a global powerhouse, a leader in multiple industries, a force for good in the world. We'd invested in renewable energy, in sustainable technologies, in a future that was both profitable and responsible. I'd also established a foundation dedicated to helping those who had been victims of corporate greed and financial manipulation, the kind of treachery I'd experienced in my past life. "You've done amazing things, Ryan," Jana said one evening as we sat on our balcony overlooking the city lights. "You've built an empire. You've changed the world." "We've changed the world," I corrected her, smiling. Together I looked at her, my wife, my partner, my love, and I felt a surge of gratitude, of happiness, of peace. "The past taught me one thing," I said. "Never trust anyone completely." I traced my fingers over my ring. But it also showed me what to look for, who to keep close, and who to keep my distance from. I had learned from my mistakes. Yes, I had become ruthless, cunning, and unforgiving. But I had also found something far more valuable. I had found love, true love. A love that had healed my broken heart and given me a reason to fight for a better future. I had been given a second chance, a second life, and I had finally made the most of it. I had avenged my past, yes, but I had also redeemed myself. I had become the man I was always meant to be, a man of strength, of integrity, of love. And that, in the end, was the greatest victory of all.